In this video, the fourth in the series, we're going to look at how horses live in the domestic situation, about the advantages and disadvantages of being a domestic horse. Well done for getting this far, but keep going. By the end of this video, you'll have learned a lot more very important information about horses, and you will be a much more knowledgeable horse owner. Please be sure to give this video the thumbs up, and if you'd like to become a more knowledgeable horse owner, make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit the bell to be notified when a new video becomes available every week. Domestic equines are managed by humans for better or for worse. They have different stresses to their more natural living counterparts. But as I said in an earlier video, once you know how, there's a lot you can do to create a better lifestyle for your horses. Make sure you keep watching this series right to the end. First, we'll look at why we keep horses the way we do. In many ways, horsekeeping practices have changed very little since the time when horses were kept for work, in terms of stabling, etc. These stalls have been in use for hundreds of years and are still in use in places such as the Royal Mews in London and the famous Spanish riding school in Vienna. 12 foot by 12 foot is the standard stable box size. This size came about many years ago, centuries ago in fact. So horse-keeping practices have changed very little since the time when horses were kept for work and often were stabled in cities, in which case they were sometimes kept in even smaller boxes or stalls such as those in the previous picture. But the role of the 21st century horse is very different to that of their ancestors, and traditional horsekeeping practices have not adapted to these changes. There are various ways that modern horses tend to be kept. Fully stabled, so that's confined for 24/7, partially stabled and out for the rest of the time, typically this is in at night and out by day, but it can be opposite, or outside 24/7, and this may be in a group or on their own. Most, but not all, of the problems that occur with horses that are classed as a welfare issue from a behavioural point of view happen due to over-confinement, so fully stabled horses often fare the worst. But just because your horse is not fully stabled doesn't mean that he or she is 100% healthy and happy either. Some owners do tend to read the behaviour of their horse wrong. A common misconception, for instance, is that a horse likes his stable, because horses will often rush into a stable. This is more likely to be because the horse knows the stable contains food. Once the food is eaten, the horse would usually like to go back out again, but chances are he doesn't have that choice. Confined horses sometimes develop stereotypic behaviours not seen in free-living horses, and unfortunately it's an accepted practice among many horse owners and horse managers to use archaic methods to prevent these behaviours, such as an electric shock collar pictured on the left, which is particularly cruel and is illegal in some countries but can be bought on the internet. And just like a more traditional windsucking collar pictured on the right, it only masks the problem but does nothing to solve it. Research has shown that crib biting and windsucking are usually caused by insufficient fibre, the horse is swallowing saliva to alleviate the acid building up in the stomach. In this example, there are solid walls and a cage door. The horse cannot even put their head over the door to look down the aisle. This example is possibly the worst case scenario. Apart from a solid door, and believe it or not, this practice is still in use. The example in this picture is also more common than you would think. If you visit a zoo and see animals in cages, it probably upsets you. But this is no better than a cage. A typical stable or stall would be totally unacceptable in a modern zoo. Imagine visiting a zoo and seeing an animal as large as a horse in a cage as small as a stable or stall. You would certainly have something to say about it. Yet it's seen as acceptable to many horse owners in the horse industry. Not all, I know, but it is to many. This is because it's part of the culture of horsekeeping. It's a largely accepted practice. People get used to seeing such things and they become immune to them. Modern zoos now go to great lengths to provide species-specific enrichment for the animals in their care. We need to do the same for our horses. Keeping horses in enclosures is not always avoidable, but there's usually lots that can be done to improve the situation. These stables are much more horse-friendly than normal. The horses can choose whether to socialise or not. They can even mutually groom each other over the wall. They can put their heads over the door in the aisle or outside. These stables are a huge improvement on the previous example. Funnily enough, even though it used to be horses that were the work animals, we're now the work horses. As well as extra care, confined horses also need lots of extra work and expense. Make sure you keep watching this video series to find out how you can reduce some, if not most of the work, and certainly reduce the expense and keep your horses healthy and happy at the same time. Another problem with confined horses is that they tend to not get enough fibre. Keep in mind that research has shown that insufficient fibre causes more stereotypic behaviours such as windsucking or cribbing, etc., and therefore stress, than lack of movement does. The reason for this tendency to not feed enough fibre is because when a horse is stabled, the owner is providing every mouthful of feed, micromanagement if you like, and so they tend to limit it either because they are calculating the cost of that fibre or otherwise. By contrast, when a horse lives outside, they have more opportunity to find their own fibre, so we do need to be careful, if possible, not to micromanage. Please comment below with what you found interesting about this video so far. Domestic equines often receive too little exercise and too much high energy feed, rather than lots of low energy, high fibre feed. Domestic equines may be over-confined, and instead of having to find their own feed and water, it's literally given to them on a plate. So we have to remember that modern management practices tend to ignore their natural behaviour and physiology. Domestic equines have no input into how they're managed, so we have to get it right. A problem is, because they suffer in silence, horse owners can be led to think that their horses are happy when in fact they are not. They do this because they're an animal that's predated on. Making a noise when in pain or stressed would signal that they are injured or are weak, and therefore make them more likely to be singled out by a predator. So, domestic horses usually have a complete lack of choice. What they do on an hour-by-hour basis is usually decided on by a human. They have no choice but to wear too many rugs if their owner decides that they are necessary. They have no choice but to stand on either side of a fence if their owner decides that they cannot be together. Notice in this picture, an awful lot of money has been spent on the fencing, but the land is in very poor condition, a case of the wrong priorities altogether. They have no choice but to graze badly managed, overgrazed or horse-sick land if that's all that's available. In the wild, the horses would simply expand their home range in these conditions, but instead these horses have to rely on humans to get it right. They're grazing the same ground all year round in all conditions ranging from dry and dusty to wet and muddy. A further issue is that land in this condition creates a poor image for the horse industry. This is being countered with an increase in legislation to limit or even prevent horse keeping in some areas. This situation is totally avoidable. There are so many benefits to improving horse and land management, less legislation being one of them. If the land that your horses live on looks like this, you might think there's nothing you can do about it, but there is, and if you start to change your management, you will reap many benefits. Even if you don't own the land, you, your horses and the environment will all be better off. If the pasture is not correctly managed, then horses will not spend time grazing or exercising themselves. They will simply stand around for hours on end, especially if they're kept separately. This wears the pasture out, creates more weeds, dust and mud, and adds to the downward spiral of events that happens with poor horse and land management. Domestic horses are often prevented from interacting with other horses. This can cause high levels of stress in a horse. But we do need to keep in mind that horses that are kept together do not get to choose their herd mates. Introducing new horses to each other must be done carefully. You can never know too much about horse behaviour though. When horses socialise, it can look aggressive. This is where the terms horseplay and horsing around come from, to describe people when they are playing roughly. These two horses have known each other from birth and are simply playing. But we also need to be aware that we can create competition and aggression by supplementary feeding grouped horses. Remember, in the wild, feed is either everywhere or nowhere at any one time. This means that free-living horses don't tend to fight over food. So, ideally, domestic horses should be separated for the short time that it takes to eat any supplementary food. Horses will usually happily share grass and hay, but not concentrates. In fact, natural living horses try to avoid aggression. There is lots of posturing and display, but actual aggressive contact is minimised, as either party could be injured and become potential prey. In the wild, there is much more room to keep out of each other's way, and there is also no artificial grouping, with few, if any, new adult members being introduced. So, just turning horses out 24/7 is not necessarily good horse management either. There's many things that you need to understand about horse management in order to keep horses outside most, if not all, of the time, but to do it well. If you don't get it right, your horse or horses and the land that they live on will suffer. The modern domestic horse is suffering from the same problems as modern humans and pets. In this picture, you could almost say the ponies are wearing designer clothes, that they themselves don't care about the latest fashion in rugs, etc. Modern domestic horses are suffering from age and obesity related problems. They're eating more junk food, such as high sugar feeds. They're rarely working physically for a living as they did in the past. The modern horse owner, just as in all areas of their life, is under huge consumer pressure to buy things that the horse does not necessarily need or want. We have to be ever mindful that we do what is right for our animals, even if that means not following the crowd. Domestic horses do tend to live longer, a lot longer, than wild horses. Meet Shane. He was thought to be the oldest horse in the world at the time, at 51, and we've since heard of horses even older than this. He was surrendered to a sanctuary at about 30 years old for retirement, but many years later he was still fit and well. He was euthanised recently as his joints were no longer strong enough to support him. So, modern domestic horses tend to have a high energy diet, and at the same time, they're not usually moving enough. They don't usually have to cope with a range of temperatures. They don't have to be on the alert. They're not usually reproducing. This, of course, is a good thing, as there are far too many unwanted horses. And, of course, they are being wormed, rugged, etc. To summarise, basically, the modern domestic horse is a couch potato compared to his ancestors and wild living relatives. In this video, you've learned about how modern domestic horses have a very different lifestyle to their free-living counterparts. Domestic horses can become stressed if we don't acknowledge important facts about their natural or normal behaviour. Modern domestic horses and their owners have many issues to face. In the next video, you're going to learn more about horse behaviour. The next video is called How Do Horses Actually Spend Their Day? In this video, you'll learn about what horses do on a daily basis. So we're drilling down into their behaviour, if you like. To watch this video, you'll need to sign up for the rest of the free horse grazing characteristics course on our website. There's a link below. If you've enjoyed this video, please let us know by liking it. Subscribe and share with your fellow horsey friends, and please leave a comment with what you found interesting. Make sure you look out for the next video in this series. There's a link below. You can get the whole mini course about horse grazing characteristics for free. See the link. If you're interested in learning more about better horse management by learning about what is really important to your horse, we have a private Facebook group, but do the course first and see if this interests you.